Welcome back. In Point of View, our feature segment, I speak to two experts on two pressing global issues: Europe's rising extreme weather threat and the growing cybersecurity challenges in the age of artificial intelligence. First, I speak to SUBHALAKSHMI, GANAPATHY, Chief IT Security Evangelist at ManageEngine, on the evolving global cybersecurity threat as AI becomes increasingly embedded in our lives and workplaces. And later, MIREY ATALLAH, Chief of the Adaptation and Resilience Branch, Climate Change Division at the United Nations Environment Programme, on Europe's increasingly extreme weather and what can be done to strengthen resilience. I'm Jason Wee, and this is The World on Bernama TV. Now, artificial intelligence is transforming the world, but it's also creating new and increasingly sophisticated cybersecurity threats. From AI-powered scams and deepfakes to attacks targeting businesses and critical infrastructure, cybersecurity has become a global challenge. So how can organizations stay ahead in the AI era? Joining me is SUBHALAKSHMI Ganapathy, Chief IT Security Evangelist at ManageEngine. Subha, thank you so much for joining us. To kick us off, as countries around the world accelerate their digital transformation, why has cybersecurity become a strategic business priority rather than just an IT function? We've seen a string of recent AI-related security incidents involving major AI labs, including cases where AI models reportedly broke out of their testing environments and accessed other company systems. What's your take on this?
It's an interesting question, and the landscape is quite changing now, as you rightly said. So I should talk a bit about IT evolution here. A couple of decades back, a cyber incident meant systems were down for a day and then the IT team fixed it. But for most of the business now, digital isn't something they use or they operate on. It is actually the business. So protecting it is never really a support function. So now, a cybersecurity incident actually means customers can't be served. A supply chain stops. And the thing that took companies 20 years to build, their customers' trust, their people's trust, takes a real hit in one afternoon. But the bigger shift here is, like how regulation authorities have rightly perceived and gave a legal perspective to a cybersecurity incident. And when AI comes into picture, how quickly these regulations are actually changing. So regional compliances, take for example, Malaysia's data protection rule, now require a named person to be accountable, and they are required to tell the regulator within 72 hours of realizing that they have a breach. Once a law asks who is accountable, it's no longer an IT question anymore. It's a board question with somebody's name attached to it. And that has reiterated compulsively on why cybersecurity is a strategic business priority, whatever that come, like AI, the cloud adoption, or the digitalization, digital transformation, and anything.
As you just mentioned, we know organizations are rapidly adopting AI, cloud technology, as you mentioned, and connected systems. But we are also now seeing AI systems becoming increasingly autonomous, with recent security tests involving models from OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta reportedly demonstrating the ability to identify and exploit vulnerabilities. In your opinion, what are the biggest cybersecurity challenges they should be preparing for today?
Now is not the size of the attack surface, it's how it is fragmented. So when I say it's fragmented, it means a attack doesn't happen in one place anymore. So it starts with an email, moves through somebody's login, touches the cloud servers, or ends up in a server. And where AI comes into picture, it has access to all of these things through, like the permissions to through an autonomous agents, or how the data actually flows between each of the system. So each of these keeps its record on its own and its own format, and nobody joins them up, and AI joins them up, and that is actually increasing the attack surface. So the evidence usually exists. It is just scattered across a dozen systems, half written in each one. So it's already complex and sophisticated to detect and deal with. With the advent of AI, it exposes additional fragmented attack surfaces. So our own research found that 85% of IT leaders say their people are adopting AI tools faster than the team can access them. And But it means that your information is now mapped or in places that nobody has actually mapped. There are like sensitive information across where we don't know where it exists. And the second complexity of the advent of AI is how they operate and their identity. So when we say the identity, it is the non-human identity. So when we actually say identities, we usually associate with the people. But most organizations still think that way. The identities are employees, the customers, the supply chain vendor accounts that they are given into. But the advent of AI has actually changed this landscape. We say that more than, like 80 per 800 is to 1 is the non-human identity to human identity ratio. So in reality, these machine identities, the application, autonomous AI agents, which has permissions across the infrastructure of an enterprise, is making the cyber challenge is really harder. And most companies can't tell you how many they have got the non-human identities because it extends the permissions of a user who created that agents. Companies are quite learning right now to adopt to securing these non-human identities, monitoring their behavior to detect attack patterns. But this is one of the complex challenges with the advent of AI.
I mean, given that cybersecurity attacks are increasingly complex, as you just mentioned, what practical steps can organizations and individuals take to strengthen their cyber resilience against these increasingly sophisticated threats?
So let me start with the individuals first because everything here that I'm going to say is something that we can start implementing right tonight. So turn on the two-step notifications, especially on the email. And email is now how everything else gets reset. So if somebody owns your email, they own kind of everything. And if your bank offers a passkey, use it. It can't be phished. The second one is the one actually saves people. Slow down when something feels really urgent. Every scam needs you to act before you actually think. So your account will be closed today. I need this payment now. This urgency is the product that they are selling. If money is involved, hang up and call back on the number you already have. So these are some of the steps that individuals can take to effectively, be cyber resilient. For organizations, honestly, the basics are still where most of the value is. Know what you actually own. You'd be surprised how many breaches start on a server nobody remembered was running. And bring your records into one place and actually look at them and rehearse the incident, including who picks up to the phone to the regulator and how quickly you can communicate to the notification authorities. Because right now, the global average time to find and contain a breach is still measured in hundreds of days. That's the number we should all be worried about and work to bring it down.
So, people are currently discussing that building cyber resilience requires collaboration across sectors. In your opinion, how can governments, businesses, and technology providers work together to create a safer digital ecosystem?
So, the uncomfortable truth is adversaries will often collaborate better than we do. They share tools, techniques, and information. There is a functioning marketplace. The thing worth understanding is why collaboration is hard for us and easy for them. An attacker only has to share one thing: what worked and what is their, the pattern or what is their this trace or the signature. An organization that's been attacked has to weigh the reputation, legal exposure, customers, regulators, and so on. So the incentives are actually stacked, and the actual problem, and that's the actual problem we need to solve. And I must say it's solvable when we approach it together. I always refer to security ecosystem, an environment where everybody has a role to play and to protect. So together, to quote an example, a power grid isn't protected by one company. Neither is a part or a banking system. They are protected by everyone connected to them together. Security is almost the same. We have been just slower to organize it that way, which is why it's genuinely encouraging to see Malaysia putting a national framework in place as like cybersecurity as a national framework in place. And collaboration works much better when there is a clear structure for it. So, what does that look like in practice? From government, a clarity and making reporting feel safer rather than punishable. Because if reporting feels dangerous, people report late. Also, how
Suba,
regulations and government can help combat attacks. For
Suba,
instance, Malaysia is updating this through initiatives like the Cybercrime Bill 2026, granting broader powers under the National Cybersecurity Agency in helping sectors combat evolving threats
Su-
together. That's a
Suba,
welcoming initiative.
Suba, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But thank you so much for
Okay,
your insights and really
no problem.
appreciate your understanding of where Malaysia is at as well. We hope to have you back with us as the cybersecurity landscape continues to evolve and new challenges emerge. That was SUBHALAKSHMI GANAPATHY, Chief IT Security Evangelist at ManageEngine. Europe is facing a summer of record-breaking heat, prolonged drought, and destructive wildfires, with growing impacts on public health, water supplies, agriculture, and energy production. Low river levels are also disrupting shipping and putting pressure on power generation, highlighting how extreme weather can have far-reaching consequences. So how serious is Europe's climate risk, and is the continent prepared for what lies ahead? Joining me is MIREY ATALLAH, Chief of the Adaptation and Resilience Branch, Climate Change Division, UN Environment Program, or UNEP. MIREY, thank you so much for joining us. To start us off, we are seeing heat waves, drought, wildfires, and record low river levels happening across different parts of Europe this summer. From UNEP's perspective, how should we understand what is happening? And are these still extreme individual events, or are we seeing a longer-term shift in Europe's climate?
That's a very good question. Hi, Jason. Pleasure to meet you, to see you here and to join you for this discussion. Actually, you raise a very important point, which is the fact that what we are currently seeing is not only a change in weather patterns, we're seeing a change in climate patterns. And if I can define, weather is the regular short-term changes, whereas climate is the longer change in weather patterns themselves. And indeed, we are seeing shifts in recurrence, so how often extreme heat happens, in duration. For example, a heat wave is defined on the basis of a number of consecutive days above a certain temperature. Those numbers of days are increasing. And third, we're seeing a shift in where extreme heat is happening, or where wildfires are happening for that matter. In France, for instance, or in Europe as a whole, the Mediterranean side of Europe was the most fire prone. Now we are seeing fires shifting towards the Atlantic coast, west coast, and northern areas as well. And that is part of a broader shift in climate that we are witnessing. But I would be amiss if I didn't also mention the fact that it's a combination of how we use natural resources like water, how we protect forests, how we manage them as well, and the shifting climate patterns.
I think many would be surprised to know that Europe is described as the world's fastest warming continent. Why is Europe warming so quickly compared with other parts of the world?
So the main driver of Europe's climate is the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Current. So that's a very complicated word for what you will often hear in the media termed as the AMOC. And what we are seeing right now, precisely to your map on the left side, on the western side of Europe, what we are seeing is a shift in this AMOC. And that is one of the major contributors to how Europe's climate unfolds. And with this shift in the AMOC, which is essentially collapsing, where the cooling effect is not happening anymore, or is happening less. And so we are seeing this higher pattern of warming in Europe. And yes, you are right. Europe is one of the fastest warming areas.
One particularly striking example for me is the impact on nuclear power. So Hungary's Paks nuclear plant has had to significantly reduce outputs because of low river levels and high water temperatures, while Romania has shut down its last working reactor. What does this tell us about the vulnerability of Europe's energy infrastructure to a changing climate?
So it's multifold. You mentioned Hungary and Romania, but remember also that France had to shut down a couple of its nuclear power plants as well, precisely because of the two reasons that you've mentioned. One is water level, and second is water temperature. In order to cool down a nuclear reactor or power plant, you actually need water that is at a temperature because of thermodynamics. You need water that is at a lower temperature than the reactor itself. What we are witnessing is that power systems and infrastructure are vulnerable in two ways. One is on the production side, like what you've just mentioned, with nuclear power plants having to shut down because of the unavailability or impossibility for utilization of water resources to cool down the nuclear power plants. But a second one that we're witnessing, and this is very much related to how we cope with extreme heat, is that we're seeing a surge in demand on power plants and on power supply. And that is something that we had not anticipated before, is that the response to extreme heat is primarily coming through air conditioning and appliances. And that's creating a surge in demand and in certain cases, a collapse of the possibility and power of power supply. So the vulnerability is unfolding in many different ways, and I think that if we look at different power supply systems and mechanisms, we do see that renewables are, for example, performing much better than fossil based power systems, or than power systems that do rely on that natural cooling provision by water resources.
So, MIREY, if extreme heat, drought, and wildfires are going to become more frequent, we know governments can't prevent every event from happening. But what are the most urgent adaptation measures that Europe should be investing in now?
I would say first and foremost, passive cooling, investing in passive cooling approaches. Europe in particular, Europe is a very urban continent. And so it's in urban areas that we will see the impacts of extreme heat unfolding the most. It's also got an aging population, and extreme heat doesn't affect people in the same way. And so investing in passive cooling, such as increasing green areas, but more spread across the urban fabric as opposed to having pockets of green areas, is one of the most effective measures of passive cooling areas. We see that comparatively green areas can be anywhere between 3 to 9 degrees cooler than areas that are heavily cemented and or only based on concrete. The second thing is retrofitting buildings, because Europe's buildings are conceived for cold weather. So it's essentially when you've got extreme heat, it's essentially the buildings function as an oven. You're inside and you're baking inside that building. What we're seeing more and more is, and here there's a little bit of nuance that I would like to introduce. Even though Europe is heating, at the same time, we will see more extreme cold weather as well. And so, for example, again, passive cooling, such as heat pumps, are extremely functional in both extremes, in the hotter weather and in the colder weather, because this is what we're going to be having. This is what we have to respond to more and more going forward, is how to those extremes, rather than occurring once every 10 years or 20 years, are going to become a little bit of the new norm. And so if I had to restrict my response to these two, I would say more green areas and more passive cooling through heat pumps, through thermal codes, through retrofitting buildings, so that they become more thermally adequate for the future.
And MIREY, in the last minute we have, if even Europe is struggling with this extreme weather, what should the rest of the world be learning from Europe's experience?
Interestingly, Europe can learn from the rest of the world, because if we think about climate change, what we are seeing, what's happening is essentially a climate analog. So Europe's weather, the weather climate in general is shifting northwards. So Europe's weather, if you want comparatively, is becoming more similar to the weather in North Africa. And so, in fact, Europe has a lot to learn from traditional conceptual architecture in North Africa, where you have more green spaces, cooler areas where you have fountains in the middle of buildings. But I think also there is a lot to learn from Europe in terms of avoiding, for example, reforestation with a single species, or not managing forests in a closer to nature way, in that forests that are managed strictly for production purposes are much more vulnerable to fires, because it's a single species, single age. You don't have the diversity that helps buffer the fires. So there's a lot to be learned from that.
MIREY, thank you so much for helping us understand what these extreme weather events mean for Europe and beyond. We hope to speak with you again soon. That's all for now. For the latest news, visit Bernama.com. This has been The World on Bernama TV. I'm Jason Wee. Thanks for watching.